Okay, so this is the third part of the lecture on the Second Estate, and we deal with something that is very medieval indeed, and that is the Crusades. And of all the things, knights are very proud of themselves, and they have this code of chivalry. But it is crusading that really makes knighthood prestigious. Now, crusading is something that we're actually kind of embarrassed about now. All right. I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me just say that the church does not like fighting. It does not like the needless shedding of Christian blood. And the church repeatedly condemned it. They condemned tourneying. They condemned, knights fighting each other gratuitously and so on. But eventually they threw in the towel. And they said, okay, you guys aren't so bad, really. You guys are pretty good at what you do. But what you really need to do is you need to take your skill and you need to go to the Holy Land and you need to liberate it for Christendom. All right, so that's what crusading is. It's sending a military force to what is now Israel to take it back from the Muslims and to establish a Christian kingdom over the places where Jesus lived. Okay. Now, as you remember, the Muslims have possessed the Holy Land from the 7th century. And only now, only in the 11th century, was it decided that we should engage in some counter-jihad, that we should try to take that back from the Muslims. So historians like to ask, why does this happen now? Why did it take them 500 years to get around to taking it back? Well, there's a number of reasons. Okay. First of all, Muslims actually, they're not bad stewards of Christian places because, of course, Jesus is important to Muslims too. He's a great prophet. They don't believe he is the Son of God, but he has a respected place in Islam. And of course, Muslims aren't stupid. They recognize a good opportunity when they see it. And so Christians go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Well, you can pay the Muslims for the privilege of doing that. So to go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is very lucrative for the people who control Jerusalem. The trouble is that in 1009, Caliph Hakim, who really was mentally ill, ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and that sent shockwaves through Europe. It's like, wow, these people are not good stewards of Christian places. The other thing is that by 1071, you have a new group that has moved in to Asia Minor. These are the Turks, and they defeated the Byzantine Empire at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, and this was a very decisive battle. This basically gave Asia Minor to the Turks. Asia Minor, of course, is now where Turkey is. So the Turks move in and they take the place over. We talked last time about papal power growing. Largely the Crusades are a product of the Reformed papacy. It gives the papacy something to do. And of course, it's all about exporting Christian violence away from Europe. Next time we'll talk about the commercial revolution. Europe is simply richer, so it can afford this sort of thing. And finally, popular opinion actually demanded it. There were a number of preachers going around whipping up popular opinion, really playing up how bad the Turks are and how bad the Muslims are, and that it's a great deed to go and liberate those holy lands for Christianity. Okay, so There are a number of crusades, and the first one happened in the late 11th century. The Pope, by this point Pope Urban II, gave a barnstorming speech at a place called Clermont-Ferrand in France, and a lot of the French nobility were there, and they heard it, and they enthusiastically shouted, Deus vult, okay, God wills it. They thought this was a fantastic idea, and the Pope offered various incentives for them to go. And so they got their army together, and they made their way to the Holy Land, and they were remarkably successful. I mean, in the face of a great deal of difficulty, I might add. And so they established actually 4 Crusader kingdoms, which you can see there on the slide on the left. So from the north to the south, it's Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, and then Jerusalem. Which is, it's interesting, isn't it? Why not establish one Crusader kingdom? Well, this is a bit of a, there's a bunch of egos to assuage. And they would take things piecemeal and then put different people in charge of them. But the fact is that the Crusader states were never entirely united, and sometimes they would fall out with each other. Jerusalem, of course, is the most important one. That's not just the city, it's the whole, it's basically what is now the state of Israel. But even Edessa was in what is now Turkey. Antioch and Tripoli are in what is now Lebanon and Syria. And if you go to Syria, actually I don't recommend you go to Syria these days, but if the fighting ever dies down and tourism picks up again, and you go to Syria, you can see Crac des Chevaliers, which is the picture on the right. It is a Crusader castle that was built to defend the Principality of Tripoli. So that's great. Look at this. The Crusaders have come. They've established these kingdoms. They're supplying them from Europe. But Europe is not able to maintain colonies like this. Not in the 11th, 12th centuries. Muslims have home field advantage, and they only have to bide their time and wait for weaknesses among the Crusaders, and eventually they launch an attack. So in 1144, the kingdom of Edessa fell. Europeans called a new crusade. That failed. Then, later on, Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, fell to a Muslim leader named Saladin. So, in the 1190s, we have the Third Crusade, and this was a kind of all-star crusade because this crusade, actual kings went on this one. So you have Richard I of England, also known as Richard the Lionheart, Philip II of France, also known as Philip Augustus, and then the Emperor of the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of Germany, Frederick Barbarossa. So Frederick I, Barbarossa means red beard. And they all went. Barbarossa unfortunately drowned trying to ford a river. Richard and Philip fell out with each other. Philip took his ball and went home. And Richard I, all he could do was negotiate with Saladin to make sure that pilgrims could get to Jerusalem. And Saladin said, sure, that's fine. So it didn't succeed in taking Jerusalem back. So their Third Crusade is another failure. And it just went downhill from there. Okay, throughout the 13th century, they're always wanting to launch a crusade to take back Jerusalem or to take back Edessa, and it never works. In fact, the Fourth Crusade was a mess. There's a whole history of it. They contracted with Venetians to take them to the Holy Land. They'd contracted way too many boats, and so the Venetians said, well, you can help us doing us a favor. and on it goes. They got involved in a succession dispute for the Byzantine Empire. The Pope washed his hands of the whole thing. They got involved in this succession dispute, and they ended up sacking Constantinople. So the Fourth Crusade never got to Jerusalem. It just took the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. And the Crusaders looted Constantinople and brought back all kinds of treasure to the West. Well, the Pope thought that was pretty good, actually. But they never made it to the Holy Land. The Fifth and Sixth Crusades, they figured maybe if we take Egypt, we can use that as a base for taking the Holy Land. But those never worked. And the Muslims, by this point, they're familiar with Crusader tactics, and they expect them at any point, and they can defend against them easily enough. The Seventh Crusade, this was against Tunis, of all places. This is, Tunis is in Tunisia, which is where Carthage used to be, sort of across from Italy on the Mediterranean Sea. That, too, was a failure. So nothing really came of these crusades. And finally, Acre, the last Christian stronghold in the Holy Land, fell in 1291. So this is the history of the Crusades in the Holy Land. It starts out very well, and then it's one long, slow decline. And 1291 represents basically the end of it. They're always making appeals to crusade. We're going to go on a crusade. We're going to take back the Holy Land. This is a very common appeal in the High and Late Middle Ages, but nothing ever comes of it. The kings of Europe are much more interested in fighting each other than they are getting together and trying to take back the Holy Land. All right, so this is the end of the third part of this lecture.